Hello and welcome to Disruptive Live. We are broadcasting to you today from VMware's European HQ, and we're covering the launch event for Virtual Cloud Network. Now I'm pleased to introduce my two guests today. We have Rory Choudhuri, Product Marketing Director, and Garry Owen, Product Marketing for Networking and Security. Hi guys, welcome.
Morning. Spot on. You got our job titles right. That's brilliant.
Yes, I know. They can be a bit of a mouthful sometimes.
Yeah,
now, we're here covering this Virtual Cloud Network launch event. So before we go any further, can you just tell myself and the audience what exactly that is?
Well, the Virtual Cloud Network is essentially a concept, a vision that VMware is introducing to market that says that everything we knew about networking previously was designed 20 years ago. Most networking regimes were designed for specific use cases, such as data center or wide area networking and so on. But that doesn't really apply any longer to a world where applications are distributed, you have Internet of Things, you have mobility for end users. So the old model basically isn't fit for purpose any longer. So the concept of the virtual cloud network is really how do you transform the network for the next 20 years? And so it's to do with local area networks and wide area networks starting to blur, being a real cost imperative in the marketplace for how do you reduce the cost of networking? How do you transform networking away from being dominated by hardware primarily and move it into a much more flexible world of software. So all of that is encompassed by this new vision for networking going forward. We call it the Virtual Cloud Network, and of course then we've got a series of products to help a customer essentially implement a virtual cloud network, or in fact, more accurately, their virtual cloud network, because a virtual cloud network for customer X is going to be different to a virtual cloud network for customer Y. So it's about flexibility, it's about cost saving, it's about moving networking into the 21st century, really.
So the virtual cloud network isn't a specific product, but it's more a concept surrounding a portfolio of products.
Yeah, the idea of the virtual cloud network is really, first of all, it definitely isn't a product. You can't buy a virtual cloud network as a SKU from VMware or indeed from anywhere else. Essentially, the concept or vision of the virtual cloud network is VMware's reaction to very clear trends and requirements that we're seeing from our customers and from other technology vendors, and about how it's all intersecting together. It's almost like it's our response to a perfect storm. It's all these things happening.
Because we've seen a lot in the world around software-defined networking, especially within the data center, and now software-defined wide area networks outside of the data center. Are we now talking about VMware's take on this and how you pull it together into a type of fabric, both inside and outside of the data center?
Yeah, the requirement clearly is that applications have changed, data have changed, and the sort of devices you plug into the network are all different. And what's more, they're different today to how they're probably going to be tomorrow. So we have to convert the network from being essentially a hardwired, inflexible collection of switches, hubs, routers and cables to something that's much more flexible. And of course, VMware's background is abstracting hardware into software. So we're applying the same principles essentially to the world of networking. And I think the big change is that we've had products like NSX on the marketplace that essentially were industry leading and revolutionary and disruptive, essentially, in the marketplace as far as local area networks are concerned. But as we said, we're starting to see this blurring of local area networks and wide area networks. So the concept of this is we're converting it into essentially a fabric, a universal fabric into which you can plug anything. And what you're plugging into that fabric today is going to be different to what you're going to be plugging it into tomorrow. So it's about future-proofing the network. It's about enabling the sort of levels of flexibility, ease of manageability, and so on that's required in a world of cloud, well, private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, Internet of Things, mobility devices, mobile phones as perfectly acceptable devices to access the network. So it's about flexibility, and it's about driving the costs of that flexibility down.
So, I mean, we've also spoken a lot around, I mean, the things that you identify and raise there around Internet of Things and modernizing business, making people more mobile, connected devices. This is often tied into the banner of digital transformation. Now, Rory, you do a lot around modernizing the data center and digital transformation projects to help VMware customers move towards this wonderful environment where things are software defined, they're more flexible, you've got a ubiquitous connectivity. So how does the virtual cloud network tie into the broader spectrum of the services VMware is working with?
I think it's just entirely analogous. I mean, if we talk cloud, and you know, Garry was mentioning the different types of cloud approaches, fundamentally what happened was you had the value that customers perceive in public cloud availability, things like agility and the ease of turning things on and off. Whether they do that or not is another conversation, but you know, the ability to do that, and also the transitioning from CapEx to OpEx. And we saw that drive an initial level of adoption of public cloud. Then there was the drive to take those principles and get those benefits in your own private data center, hence the whole initiative around modernizing the data center in order to achieve those digital transformational benefits that customers are chasing after. And therefore it's entirely consistent with that the network needs to evolve too, and it's possibly the last bastion of hardware dominance that you know, has to break down in order for customers to achieve those objectives. So I guess what I'm saying is that you have that public cloud, then take those principles, create a private cloud, which is simply a modernized data center. Unfortunately, that seems to be a bit alarming for the road behind us, but there we go. And that gives you this option to meld the two together in a hybrid approach. And that hybrid approach is blurring the boundaries of, you know, what is your data center, what's co-located, what's the public cloud, what's a SaaS application, you know, FAS, PaaS, CaaS, all kinds of things being delivered as a service. That then requires different thinking around the network. And that's really where you know, Garry's talking about, you know, blurring that line between what we used to think of, and you know, I'm guilty. I was an old networking guy for 15 years, between here the WAN endeth and here the LAN starteth, and that is no longer relevant.
Yeah, I mean, the wide area network, I think, is a perfect example of that. I mean, it's almost the last bastion of, you know, where hardware still dominates. You know, it's about extremely expensive edge of network routers. It's about essentially leased line technology, T1, frame relay, all this sort of stuff that you'd have to rent essentially from a telco provider. Again, extremely inflexible. You can't you know, flex up the capacity easily
and
without
lead times.
And lead times are huge. And you end up with the old story about, you know, how do you administer a hardware-based network? Well, it's about people in white vans with routers under their arms and sheaves of cables, and it's just doesn't work in the modern world any longer. So it's about, we just see this as being, well, actually two things. First of all, how do we make the wide area network better? How do we disrupt this model that wide area networks are about hardware? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, how do we meld those together with the local area network such that you can start to consider it as the network, not individual technologies which are managed differently and so on. You know, and technically there are so many reasons why, you know, technologies which admittedly have served us well for many years, like, as I say, like leased line, but there are so many other technologies, like, you know, pure internet, LTE even, mobility, you know, and
5G is not far away.
5G is not. So the point is, why would we restrict ourselves to something that was essentially designed 30 years ago, with all those restrictions? And now let's move forward to a world where essentially you have this concept of a universal fabric, and it means you can consider the network to be the same in the data center as it is, you know, in the branch. And then of course, I mean, we've talked about this before, Rory, as well, about the influence of Internet of Things, and then something similar but not quite the same, which is the gradual movement of processing technology out towards the edge of the network again.
It's coming back out of data centers.
Yeah, I
a
mean,
certain amount.
we all know that this is a sort of, the industry is a cyclical one. Well, that, if you're going to put significant processing power towards the edge of the network and support millions of sensors in washing machines and cameras and goodness knows what else towards the edge of the network, that means you have to have a sort of common programmable fabric that's the same out there as it is in the center. And that's the vision that we're seeing behind, you know, this concept of the virtual cloud network.
But this raises a number of quite big questions. The first one is, with all this flexibility, how are you dealing with and reducing complexity?
Well, first of all, it's about implementing the virtual cloud network as a common fabric. That's the first thing. So it means that now, whether you're plugging into that network in your own building or in somebody else's building or you know, in another country, it's essentially going to be the same interface. So it's about, as I say, removing the distinction between branch computing, wide area networks, local area networks, and just having this universal fabric. So that's absolutely critical. The second critical thing about complexity today is also about security as well. So security is still, I mean, just as networking is based on probably a 25-year-old model, security is based on a 25-year-old model as well. So it used to be that we're, you know, as I say, we talk about the old model of security is get your infrastructure working and then think about security, then put a wall around the outside. Now, in a world where data centers are now clouds, some of them might be on-premise, some of them might be outside. You've got users who now spend most of their time outside the firewall. That method of doing security is very complex because you have different solutions depending on where you are. It's also, I mean, blatantly not actually secure even. It's a security solution that isn't actually very secure.
Cracks and holes.
So given this new world, this new fabric-based, universal fabric-based approach gives us the opportunity to simplify security by implementing security throughout the fabric rather than just as a wall around it. So the concept of a virtual cloud network is that really. It's this fabric with that's essentially consistent wherever you are, you know, whether you're in the data center, in your own building, or wherever you happen to be. Consistency, right from center to edge. It's also about having a common security model throughout there. Overall, that flexibility and level of simplicity is one of the key requirements of a virtual cloud network.
I mean, I'd chip in on that in the sense that, I mean, you asked, David, about reducing complexity. And one of the challenges has always been, each time you introduce a new capability,
it normally adds to
that's a new tool set,
yeah.
That's a new management interface, that's a new operational you know, control point. And that's where the complexity comes in, because it's yet another piece where somebody has to go and do a training course and come up to speed and gain expertise. And what we are maniacal about is, let's create an infrastructure, be it the network, be it the storage, be it the virtualization of the compute, you know, all of those pieces, where you can bridge the gap between wherever the locations happen to be using a single tool set. And that is the single easiest way from an operational standpoint to reduce complexity. Then, of course, there's the security piece. And, you know, we're not going to mention those 4 letters, but there's the whole compliance piece that's very relevant right
GDPR.
now.
That's old news. That was last week.
That was last week, indeed, yes.
Now, of course, we've covered complexity and you've introduced the security element, which is fundamental to most people when they look at networking. The other sort of three-letter word or acronym that is always mentioned is quality of service, QoS. How do you address that with this concept?
Well, the concept of virtual cloud network means that if you think about quality of service, you can think about quality of service for many different ways, but if you think about it in one sense, in terms of bandwidth for a start. So the problem with a traditional wide area network or local area network, wide area network solution is that in the end, the speed at which you can communicate and the quality of service that you can actually give to your users out in the branch is at least partially determined by the size of the pipe that you've got coming out of your organization. And in a wide area network environment, you're stuck with the size of the pipe that you've rented from the telecom provider. And you don't have any ability to be able to flex up and flex down, or at least not cost effectively. So the concept certainly that we're introducing in terms of the way we are implementing a virtual cloud network is we're offering a product called NSX SD-WAN, which essentially virtualizes the wide area network. But one of the things it allows you to do is to be able to aggregate together all the various different ways that you can communicate externally. So if you already have, for instance, a leased line, we're not saying you have to throw that away, but what we are saying is if at some point in your business cycle you suddenly need to increase the bandwidth or flex that bandwidth up, then how about aggregating your T1 line with, say, an LTE line or even just a straight IP internet connection? So what about aggregating all those together so that as your users require more bandwidth to maintain the sort of quality of service that they're getting, we can actually aggregate these sort of things together in software. So you essentially have a software-based wide area network that is infinitely scalable according to the resources that you can easily and cheaply add into it. And then if you add on top of that the other elements of quality of service, which is the ability to be able to prioritize traffic to certain applications and so on, again, that's very, very easy to do in software. It's much harder to do in hardware. So absolutely, quality of service is another driver for sort of melding together all the various end-to-end elements of the network and just being a network and being able to flex that up and flex that down. So, I mean, it's quality of service, I think, is, I mean, for instance, a classic example of that is quality of service is important for many applications, but it's critical when you're talking about voice traffic, video traffic, and certainly voice over IP systems. And despite the fact there are lots of solutions on the market, it's still very, very difficult to do voice over IP over a full end-to-end network with traditional wide area network technologies. With the sort of things that we're announcing, if you like, the product that comes behind the virtual cloud network, we are able now to be able to sort of provide genuine quality of service metrics, monitoring for even very difficult traffic like that across a wide area network, because we have the ability to be able to do that.
And thinking about it, you know, I was just thinking yesterday, because I was doing a FaceTime call. I was with my mother. She wanted to talk to her sister who's in Vancouver. We were doing a FaceTime call.
He's on the phone to his mother all the time, actually.
You must be crazy. What do you mean you don't? But what was interesting was I remembered trying to do the same kind of thing 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And the pain that we went through. I was working at a networking company. I had the R&D staff at one point trying to make this work, and we didn't. You know, it was just painful. But I was thinking of the why, and the why was that you needed, in order to get that quality of service, to get things through, to punch the right holes in the right firewalls along the way, you needed to set up a common standard, you know, that would be agreed by some standard body. And then, you know, people would write to that API, and they'd write, you know, the code. Each vendor would have their own piece, but you had multiple hops along the way. One little glitch and bang, the conversation didn't happen, which was the challenge we faced. Once you start to do all of that in software, and you have the ability to lift it up and make changes as you go to abstract from the hardware, suddenly you can deliver quality of service with the security that is required, because you are still punching holes in security. So, you punch the right ones.
I think you raise a good point there, because for anyone who works on the operational side of networking, they need visibility. They need to see what's happening, where it's happening, what's going on, in order to answer these tough questions about why is this application not working, why can't I see my mum at the end of this call. So how does this product set bring that into place so that the people working in the operations side of things can actually, deliver targets?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just take a slight step back from your question to say that I would agree that a true virtual cloud network, where we're starting to think about the network on an end-to-end basis, then clearly the ability to be able to monitor and provide and manage in the way that you're saying is a critical requirement of a true universal fabric. So, as I said, what we're doing really today is we're launching the vision of the virtual cloud network, but what we're doing as well is we're also giving information out about how we're implementing a virtual cloud network, and that is via, as I say, an expansion of the NSX portfolio. So I'm sure we'll go into that in more detail later. But the key point about providing that sort of level of management that you were talking about is really the ability to have genuine, in-depth insight into what's happening on your network. Now, that's not a new concept. We've had network management tools for many, many years. But if we're honest, what we were talking about is we're talking about network management on the local area network. So we have the ability to be able to drill down to, I wouldn't quite say levels of the electron, but it's very, very low.
It's not
low
far
down.
off.
Yeah, it's very, very low down into that. So we have really, very strong insight into actually what's happening at the network level from products like our vRealize suite of products allow
see all the packets and where they're going.
Now the issue with a virtual cloud network is it isn't just the LAN anymore. This is about saying the virtual cloud network is now, if you like, in one dimension, it's now from the center to the edge. So that involves, there's local area network technology in there and wide area network technology. And now we are saying those are blurring together. But how do you now provide that level of insight on that end-to-end network rather than just the LAN part of it? And essentially, again, the concept of a virtual cloud network is not just extending the network in that sort of linear fashion. It's about sending it in 3D, because it's now about providing a fabric. It's almost like, it's just like something that connects everything together. So providing that level of insight at a very, very low level in terms of network traffic, what's happening in my network, becomes a much more multi-dimensional problem.
But what then you bring to the table when you've raised and abstracted the networking piece of it is you bring the ability to bring in all kinds of different tools. So for example, the kind of SaaS-based networking insight tools that we have available, Wavefront and Network Insight, giving you the ability to drill down into what's going on. Because at the end of the day, it's about the application.
Yeah.
Is the application getting from wherever it happens to live, be that a server, be that a cluster of servers out on the web somewhere, and it's being delivered to a user wherever that user happens to be, in an office, on a train, wherever that user happens to be. Is that pathway clear? And if it isn't, how quickly can you resolve it, or identify the issue and then resolve the issue? And that's really what we're talking about, is being able to address the issue as quickly as possible. You configure once, but you operate many times, and that's really where the challenge is. And really being able to have the ability to insert your network analysis tools, network monitoring tools, network operational tools into your virtual cloud network, created to suit whatever your business needs happen to be, that's really the big promise that this delivers on.
Now, I would probably be amiss for not raising this, but there are a lot of elements to this, a lot of products underlying this virtual cloud network concept. So how much does it cost if people want to implement this new way of doing things?
£437.56. No, I'm kidding. Well, because the way we are implementing the concept of a virtual cloud network is it involves significant parts of our existing portfolio. So the virtual cloud network, at least from one perspective, you can see it as an evolutionary strategy. So this is not bring a forklift in, get everything you've got in your network room and put it into the car park.
You don't have to move it all out, and
No.
your existing hardware-based infrastructure ties in.
Yeah, and the perfect example of that is the wide area network virtual. So NSX SD-WAN. In the end, probably if you implement using that product in 5 years' time, it's highly unlikely that you're still going to be using leased lines, because although they're established technology, very reliable, they are clearly 20th century technology. They're expensive, difficult to manage. The bandwidth isn't fantastically high. But nevertheless, you've probably made an investment in that today, and so you're not going to want to throw that away. So clearly, NSX SD-WAN allows you to continue to use that, but then add additional networking, technology into that, and then over time you can gradually remove the legacy. So I would say our solution in terms of the way we are implementing a virtual cloud network is absolutely an evolutionary one, because it has to be. The days of actually literally saying this is the new world, and by the way, you have to kill the old world to do it. It's just not reality. The investment that people have in this legacy technology is still huge.
And I think the other piece that comes into this is we have always been, very, very passionate about stating that we will maintain customer choice. And customers have to be free to use whichever vendors they wish to use to build the fabrics of their data center, of their network, of whatever else. And we work with all of those. So, in the networking world, there are a number of different vendors. One dominates, but there are plenty of others too. And, we are working so that what we deliver allows you to create your virtual network on top of any hardware, be it white box, be it branded, and also use the functionality that some of those vendors bring in addition to what we deliver. So in the same way as if you want to virtualize your servers, we don't care, use any servers you like, it's the same story. And that addresses the cost profile. We're not saying, throw out your networking switches from vendor A and bring in networking switches from our dear buddy vendor B. That's absolutely not what we do.
Now, we're running a little low on time here, so just before we sign off, I had a few questions earlier today from the actual online launch event, which I've got right here. One is quite a good one. It's from a VMware partner. How do I offer this to my customers?
Right, so I think it's like a lot of disruptive technology solutions, the products actually are only a small part of it. The opportunity for partners is that, firstly, and partners, if they're not already aware of this, they need to go and talk to their customers in a bit more detail. Their customers are either already doing this, or they are planning to do it, because this move from a much more monolithic, inflexible hardware-based network to something that's much more flexible. It's a clear part of their digital transformation. It's an absolutely necessary prerequisite to any of these other moves to the cloud, adoption of HCI, all of these things. It's all part of it. So their customers are definitely going to be doing this. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you can't just, as I say, buy a product, put it in and say, I've got a virtual cloud network. It just doesn't work like that, because everybody's circumstances, everybody's business cycles, everybody's requirement for flexibility in operational models and so on in the future are going to be different. So the reality is, in order to do this, customers need help. And that help is essentially knowledge-based consultancy. It's all the things that partners love, because you can charge, I don't know, X for a product, but you can pretty well guarantee you can charge 2X, 3X, 4X for the amount of consultancy and help that those customers are going to need to
Actually
do.
understanding the customer's business, being that trusted advisor, putting the correct solution in place, working with what they've got.
Defining what that correct solution is, helping the customer do it.
Now, I do have more questions, but we're so tight on time. I'll let you get back to the event. I mean, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, Rory, Garry, for coming on, telling me, explaining the virtual cloud network, both to myself and our audience. So I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing more products coming out and seeing this concept really evolve and develop into something quite powerful. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right, you've been watching Disruptive Live. We've been broadcasting to you directly from VMware's European HQ, covering the Virtual Cloud Network event. So I am David Organ, and hopefully I'll see you again soon with more tech news and everything else related to the wonderful industry of cloud computing.